I used to think retirement meant rest. 40 years of teaching history at Hollow Creek High had worn grooves into my life, bells ringing, papers stacked, kids arguing about whether the Civil War was really about states' rights. When I finally turned in my last set of keys, I figured it earned a quiet corner of the world, so I bought one. It wasn't much. A single-story ranch at the far edge of a Texas subdivision that hadn't quite decided if it wanted to be country or city. One side open pasture that shimmered gold at sunset. On the other, a handful of cul-de-sacs curving around a man-made pond. They called the place Oak Hollow Estates. Sounded fancy. Really, it was just good dirt and people who mowed on Saturdays. The day I moved in, I stood on the porch and breathed the cedar sweet air. The house had a sagging porch swing, a roof that still smelled of fresh tar, and a view of the hills that rolled like old shoulders toward the horizon. "This'll do," I remember whispering. For a while it did. I filled the place with the kind of quiet that had always been missing from my classroom life. Mornings were coffee and newspaper rustle. Afternoons, the hum of a riding mower tracing neat rows across the yard. I built shelves for my history books, framed old photographs of my students, even hung my wife Carol's favorite wind chimes by the back door. Carol had been gone 10 years by then, breast cancer, sudden and cruel, but in that house, with the breeze tapping those chimes, she felt close. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch swing and imagine her voice. "George Clayton, you finally stopped grading papers. Peace." That's what I thought A bought, but peace doesn't last long when people start razoring it. At first, the Homeowners Association was nothing more than a handful of friendly neighbors trying to keep the pond clean and the mailboxes straight. We met once a month at the little community center near the entrance, potluck dinners, lemonade, talk about potholes. I even helped repaint the welcome sign one spring. The new folks moved in. Younger, ambitious types with polished SUVs and ideas about property value. That's when Marla Jennings appeared. Marla had the kind of smile that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. Real estate agent, 2 phones, high heels clicking across gravel like it was marble. She volunteered for the HOA board before her boxes were even unpacked. Within 6 months, she was president. At first, it seemed harmless. New newsletter, new rules about trash bins. But one morning, I opened my mailbox and found a letter printed on glossy paper with the HOA's logo at the top. Notice of violation. Shutter color non-compliant with community standard section 4B. Please repaint to approved shade ash gray within 30 days. I stared at the page, then at my house. White shutters, same as when I bought the place, same as in the realtor's photos. I chuckled, assuming it was a mix-up. The next meeting I mentioned it. "Probably just old paperwork," I said. Marla folded her arms. "No, Mr. Clayton. The board recently updated our palette. Ash gray reads more modern to prospective buyers." "Prospective buyers?" I asked. "I'm not selling." She tilted her head. "Still, consistency benefits everyone." I wanted to tell her history wasn't built on consistency. It was built on stories, on character. But arguing with a real estate agent about philosophy is like teaching a goldfish algebra. I painted one shutter gray just to see if it satisfied them. It didn't. Another letter came, final warning. Then came a fine, $50, then $100. It would have been funny if it hadn't felt like someone was erasing the place I'd built. Weeks turned into months. Each envelope in my mailbox carried a new complaint. The grass too tall, the mailbox leaning, the bird feeder unauthorized. I began to feel like a criminal in my own yard. Still, I tried to play it calm. A teacher's patience runs deep. I attended meetings, asked questions, kept my tone even. But the answers were rehearsed, bureaucratic, empty. One evening, after another of those meetings where Marla spoke like a judge and everyone else nodded like jurors, I lingered outside the hall. A young father I barely knew patted my shoulder. "They're on a power trip," he muttered. "You're not the only one." That was the first crack of light through the wall. I wasn't alone, yet the letters kept coming and the fines kept adding up. My savings began to shrink, not from the fines themselves, but from the exhaustion of fighting them. Legal consultations, certified mail, paperwork, and then the notice that changed everything. Intent to lien. Continued non-compliance may result in legal action to secure association property interests. Lien. On the home I'd bought outright with my retirement pay. I remember sitting at my kitchen table that night, the house quiet except for the clock ticking above the stove. I thought of all those years teaching kids about civic duty, about fairness, about how democracy begins with decency. And here I was being bullied by a committee of neighbors over the shade of paint on a shutter. I felt old that night, truly old, but I wasn't beaten. Not yet. The next morning, I brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead and drove down to the county records office. The clerk there, a young woman with a name tag that said Darlene, barely looked up when I asked about property liens. "Homeowners associations file them through civil court," she said, "but you can contest. Y'all need copies of your deed, bylaws, correspondence." Her voice trailed off as she handed me a stack of forms thicker than a phone book. That's when I realized something important. These people weren't stronger than me, they were just organized. And I'd spent 40 years teaching organization. For 2 weeks straight, my kitchen became a war room. I labeled manila folders, highlighted passages, and even drew timelines on yellow legal pads. Carol would have laughed seeing me treat the HOA like a history lesson, but it gave me purpose. Still, as I worked, I noticed the silence of the house settling deeper around me. My breath came shorter. My hands trembled when I poured coffee. I blamed it on age, but there was more to it. I just didn't want to know yet. By early autumn, I'd filed my appeal. The HOA was furious. They called an emergency meeting to address repeated acts of insubordination. I went dressed in my old teaching suit, gray tweed with elbow patches. It still fit mostly. When I walked into the hall, everyone went quiet. Marla sat at the head table, a row of board members flanking her like jurors again. She smiled, but her eyes didn't. "Mr. Clayton, do you have something to say before we proceed?" I nodded and unfolded my notes. "Yes," I said, "I do. I looked up every bylaw you cited. Half of them were adopted after I bought my home, which means they can't be retroactively enforced without a unanimous homeowner vote." There was a rustle of whispers. I continued. "Section 4B, the one about shutter code, never passed full approval. You changed it in a closed session. That's not democracy. That's a dictatorship with better landscaping." Someone in the back chuckled. Marla's smile thinned. "You're way out of line, Mr. Clayton." "I taught history for 40 years, I said quietly. "I know what lines are worth crossing." The meeting adjourned in chaos. But as I stepped outside into the cool October air, I knew the battle had just begun. The weeks that followed blurred together. Letters kept coming, but now the neighbors began to talk. One morning, I found a plate of cookies on my porch with a note that read, "Hang in there, Mr. C, another day," the local paper called. A reporter had heard about the retired teacher versus HOA dispute. I declined to comment, but the headline appeared anyway. "Hollow Creek HOA faces pushback over petty enforcement." It was small-town news, but it spread fast. Suddenly, every trip to the grocery store ended with someone patting my shoulder. "Good for you, George." Someone had to stand up to them. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just wanted peace. But peace was the one thing I couldn't find. The stress began to take its toll. One night I woke with a pain in my chest that felt like a fist squeezing my ribs. I sat on the edge of the bed, sweat cooling on my back, and told myself it was just indigestion. It wasn't. A few days later, during a walk to the mailbox, the world tilted sideways. When I came to, I was on the grass, the neighbor's dog barking somewhere distant. The next thing I remember is the white ceiling of the ER. "Heart failure," the doctor said. "You need to slow down." I wanted to laugh. "Doc, I'm retired. This is me slowing down." He didn't smile. "Then slow your worrying. Whatever's weighing you down, let it go." "But how do you let go when it's your home on the line?" I returned home to find yet another envelope taped to my door. This one wasn't printed on glossy paper. It was plain white handwritten. Inside was a short note. "Mr. Clayton, I don't agree with what the board's doing. If you ever need help, knock on 214 Willow Bend. Eddie." Eddie was a young mechanic who lived 2 streets over. We'd spoken maybe twice. I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. Something about it steadied me. That weekend he came by with his little girl, maybe 6 years old, carrying a tray of muffins. "My wife baked these," he said. "Figured you could use a friend." I thanked him, and for the first time in months, laughter filled the porch again. His daughter pointed at the bird feeder. "Mom says ours isn't allowed." "Mine either," I said, "but the birds don't read memos." Eddie chuckled. "Guess rules don't mean much if they forget who they're A for." He was right. Rules are meant to serve people, not trap them. That was something he spent my life teaching, and something Marla's board had forgotten. That night, as I watched the sunset behind the oaks, I made myself a promise. If I had to spend the rest of my strength fighting for this home, I would. But I'd do it my way, not with anger, but with grace. Funny thing about life, the quieter you fight, the louder people hear you. Over the next month, more neighbors began speaking up. They attended meetings, questioned fees, demanded transparency. I didn't lead them. I just sat in my usual seat at the back and watched the tide turn. But Marla wasn't backing down. Power rarely does. She called for a private compliance inspection of my property. 2 board members showed up with clipboards while I was raking leaves. They walked the perimeter like surveyors, jotting notes, snapping photos. After noon, I said, neither looked up. One murmured, "Routine check." I leaned on my rake. "Make sure you get my good side." They didn't laugh. 2 days later, another notice arrived, claims of structural deterioration in my porch railing, potential safety hazards, and an unauthorized modification to the garden fence. It was absurd. The railing had held since 1987, and the fence was original. Still, I knew what they were doing. If they couldn't find me into submission, they'd scare me into leaving. And that's when my heart began to fail faster than my patience. I started keeping a notebook by the recliner. Not a journal, just notes, reminders, thoughts I couldn't quite say out loud. One page read, "Ask lawyer about Leon." Another, "Refused to repaint shutters." White stands for peace, but most of it wasn't about the HOA at all. It was about Carol, about what she'd say if she were still here. She always saw beauty where I saw problems. Once, when a storm blew half our fence down, I cursed the mess. She said, "Look, George, you can finally see the meadow behind it." I never forgot that. Now, sitting in that quiet house with letters piled on the counter, I realized Ed'd been looking at everything through the fence. Maybe it was time to see the meadow again. So instead of fighting back in anger, I started reclaiming joy in small ways. I fixed up the bird feeder, oiled the porch swing, planted wildflowers out front. Every act felt like defiance and prayer rolled into one. Of course, the HOA didn't see it that way. A week later, I got a photo in the mail, my yard taken from the street, scribbled beneath it in red ink, "Unauthorized flora. Remove immediately, unauthorized flora." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. They just declared war on flowers. That night, I walked outside with a flashlight, staring at those little blooms pushing through the soil, purple coneflowers, yellow coreopsis, bright and stubborn. "Keep growing," I whispered. "You're a tougher than they think." Winter crept in slowly that year. Hollow Creek doesn't get much snow, but the cold had a way of settling into your bones. I noticed mine didn't shake it off as easily anymore. Simple chores took longer. Climbing the porch steps left me winded. One morning I went to fetch the mail and had to stop halfway down the driveway, gripping the railing, gasping like it'd run a mile. I told myself it was just a chill, but deep down I knew better. The next doctor visit confirmed it. Congestive heart failure, he said gently, as if softening the words might change their weight. You need to avoid stress. I laughed under my breath. Then you'll have to move to Mars. He smiled faintly. Maybe just avoid your HOA. I promised it'd take it easy, but how do you relax when your home feels like a battlefield? That night I sat by the window looking out at the porch lights blinking down the street. For a brief moment, everything was still, the kind of still that feels almost holy. I realized that maybe my fight wasn't about property lines or paint. Maybe it was about dignity. I'd spent decades teaching kids about standing up for what mattered, about leaving the world better than you found it. Maybe this was my final lesson. Then came the storm, the real one. Late February, heavy winds, rain hammering sideways. Around midnight, a crack of thunder so sharp it rattled the windows. I looked out to see one of the old oaks split in half, the top crashing down across my fence. By morning, the yard was a mess, limbs everywhere, shingles scattered, the fence nearly gone. Before I could even call for cleanup, I heard the sound of a camera shutter. I stepped onto the porch and there they were again, 2 HOA inspectors in rain ponchos snapping photos. Morning, I called, you boys out enjoying the weather? No answer, just more photos. By noon, I had another notice, property damage in violation of community maintenance standards. Fines may apply. Something inside me broke, not in anger, but in sadness. The kind that sits heavy in your chest because you can't believe people can be that small. I sat in my truck for an hour before starting it, just staring at the fallen oak. Harold loved that tree. We'd hung a tire swing from it once for the neighbor's kids. I thought about cutting it up, clearing it away, but then I realized it wasn't blocking anything. It wasn't hurting anyone. It was just there, a part of life's mess, so I left it. A week later, a few of the neighborhood kids came by and turned it into an adventure playground. Laughter filled the yard again, and I didn't stop them. That's when Eddie the mechanic stopped by again. You sure know how to annoy them, he said, nodding toward the fallen tree. Not trying to, I said, just living, he grinned. Maybe that's what gets to them most. Following month, I received the most chilling envelope yet. Notice of pending foreclosure proceedings. I must read it a dozen times, my hands trembling. They'd actually filed a lien and were moving to take my home. That night, I called my lawyer, an old friend named Whitaker, who'd once been on the school board. When I told him what was happening, there was a long pause on the line. George, he said, finally, these cases can get ugly, but if you want to fight, he'll stand beside you. I hesitated. What if I don't win? He sighed. They would make sure the loss means something. That conversation stayed with me. I spent the next few nights thinking about meaning, about legacy, really. When you reach a certain age, every decision feels like it might be your last chance to leave something good behind. So I began to think about after the house, after me, after the letters stopped coming. What would this place stand for when I was gone? I looked around the living room, the shelves lined with history books, the framed photos of students, the papers I'd kept from my classroom days. Maybe this was the house being stolen. Maybe it was a lesson waiting to be given. And that's when the idea came. If they were so determined to take my home, it'd make sure they couldn't use it for profit or control. It'd make it a place that could never belong to them again, a place for learning, for peace, for kids who needed somewhere to go when the world felt unfair. It wouldn't stop them from winning the fight, maybe, but it would stop them from owning the victory. I called Whitaker again the next morning. Can a man give away his house before they take it? I asked. He laughed softly. George, you've got something cooking, don't you? Just a final lesson plan, I said. After that phone call with Whitaker, I didn't sleep much. My heart felt heavier than usual, not just from the doctor's warnings, but from the weight of decisions I knew I'd have to make. I kept replaying the words in my head. Can a man give away his house before they take it? It sounded defiant, almost reckless, but something about it made sense to me. Carol used to say, if you can't win the fight, change the rules. Maybe that was what I was doing, changing the rules one last time. The next morning, I opened the blinds and looked out across the yard. The fallen oak still lay there, moss starting to creep up its bark. The kids had tied an old rope around one of the limbs and hung a swing again. I could almost hear Carol laughing. That morning felt different, like peace, faint but real. But peace doesn't last long when you've got people like the Hollow Creek HOA sniffing around. By noon, it had received 3 new letters, one about the tree, one about debris visible from street view, and one summoning me to a mandatory compliance hearing. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening at the Hollow Creek Clubhouse, the same place we used to host potlucks and school fundraisers. The same building that had once been a symbol of community. Now it felt like a courthouse. When I walked in that Tuesday, the air smelled of disinfectant and cheap coffee. The HOA board sat at a long folding table, papers neatly stacked, nameplates shining under the fluorescent lights. There were 5 of them, all neighbors I used to wave to. The president, Marilyn Cox, was a woman in her 50s with a voice like sandpaper and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Turner, she began, flipping through her binder. We've received multiple reports of noncompliance and negligence regarding your property. Negligence? I asked, settling into the metal chair across from her. You mean the storm that knocked my fence down, or the flowers that make people smile when they walk past? A man at the end of the table, Rick, the treasurer, muttered, You're violating community standards. I folded my hands steady, standards that seem to change every week. Marilyn's smile thinned. We've been more than patient, but the association can't make exceptions for personal circumstances. Personal circumstances, I repeated. You mean me getting old or sick or my wife dying here, those kinds of circumstances? Her eyes flickered for just a second. Guilt, maybe. Then she looked down at her papers. We're not here to discuss emotions, Mr. Turner, only compliance. There it was, only compliance. That phrase would echo in my head for weeks afterward. The meeting ended with a stack of papers and a warning. If I didn't bring the property into conformity within 30 days, they'd move forward with enforcement, which meant more fines, more legal fees, and eventually foreclosure. When I walked out of the clubhouse, it was already dark. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead. I could see my reflection in my truck window, tired, lined, older than I remembered. As I started the engine, I noticed Eddie's pickup across the lot. He'd been sitting there the whole time just waiting. He rolled down his window. How bad? Bad, I said. He nodded slowly. You gonna let him win? I looked at him for a moment. Not while I'm breathing. He grinned. Then he'll help you build whatever comes next. That's what I told him, my plan: to give the land away before they could touch it. Not sell it, not lose it, give it to someone who'd use it for good. Eddie just stared at me for a second. You serious? Dead serious. He leaned back and let out a low whistle. Man, when you go down, you go down with fireworks. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork, late-night calls with Whitaker, and quiet mornings on the porch with my coffee and my thoughts. My body was slowing down fast, but my mind was sharper than ever, maybe because I knew I didn't have much time left. We drew up the documents carefully. The property, the land, even the mineral rights, all of it would go to a small educational trust I set up in Carol's name. The Turner Foundation for Rural Learning. It sounded fancy, but it was simple. Kids from the local high school could come out here for weekend workshops, learn carpentry, gardening, mechanics, life skills. Things I used to teach my students back in the day. I poured my heart into it, not because I thought it'd make the HOA happy, but because it made me whole again. The HOA, of course, caught wind of it. About 2 weeks before the foreclosure hearing, I got a call from Marilyn herself. Her voice was clipped and formal. Mr. Turner, we've been made aware of some irregular transfers of property ownership. Irregular? I asked. Playing dumb? You mean legal ones? She ignored the jab. If you're exempted to avoid association fees or fines, this could be considered fraud. I laughed softly. You can't find a nonprofit, Marilyn. You can't threaten kids with a lien. Silence on the line. Then sharp. You're making a mockery of this community. No, I said quietly. I'm reminding it what community means. Then I hung up. A few days later, they escalated. First, I noticed strange cars idling near my property line, black sedans, unfamiliar faces behind the wheel. Then came the letters, certified mail, thick envelopes full of legalese. But what really got me was the day they put up the sign. I came home from the doctor's office to find a big red notice staked right at the edge of my yard: foreclosure pending, trespassing subject to removal. That was the day something inside me clicked. All the anger, the fear, the exhaustion, it melted away and left only clarity. I wasn't scared anymore. It'd done everything right. It turned my pain into purpose. Now it was their move, and oh, did they make it. A week later, I woke up to the sound of sirens. Blue and red lights flashed through my window. I shuffled to the door, heart pounding, and there they were, 2 sheriff's deputies standing in the rain. Behind them, Marilyn and Rick, clipboards in hand, smug as could be. Mr. Turner, one deputy said, we're responding to a call regarding a trespassing complaint. I blinked. Trespassing on my own porch. Rick stepped forward. Technically, the association has initiated foreclosure. The property is under HOA management now. I stared at them, dumbfounded. You called the cops to kick me off my own land? Marilyn crossed her arms. We're enforcing the rules. The deputies exchanged a look. One of them, a young guy with kind eyes, finally spoke. Sir, do you have paperwork proving ownership? Without saying a word, I turned, walked back inside, and came out holding the folder, the one with the Turner Foundation deed, notarized, stamped, and signed by the county clerk himself. I handed it to him. I don't own it, I said quietly. The kids do. He flipped through the papers, whistled under his breath, and handed them back. Looks legitimate to me. He turned to Marilyn. Mom, this property's been transferred to a charitable trust. You've got no authority here. Her face drained of color. Unless you are here to donate, I added, you might want to leave. For a long moment, no one moved. The rain poured harder, pelting the gravel, thunder rolling in the distance. Then slowly the deputies got back in their cruiser. Rick muttered something under his breath, but Marilyn stayed still, frozen in shock or disbelief. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. You can't do that. I just did, I said. And then for the first time in months, I closed my door calmly, quietly, and sat down with my coffee as the rain washed everything clean. The next morning, the air felt different, still somehow cleaner. Maybe it was the rain washing away the tension, or maybe it was just me feeling lighter for the first time in months. When I walked out to get the newspaper, I noticed something strange. My driveway was dry, even though it had rained all night. Someone had been there, footprints leading up to the porch, and a small paper bag hanging from the doorknob. Inside was a thermos of coffee and a note written in a neat looping hand. Mr. Turner, you don't know me, but my daughter is one of the kids who came to help clear your yard last month. She told me about what you did, giving your land to the kids. You gave her hope. Thank you. There was no name, just a small heart drawn at the bottom. I sat there on the porch holding that note, and for the first time in a long time, I cried. Not the hard kind of crying that comes from anger, but the quiet, shaking kind that comes when your heart's been heavy for too long. The sheriff's deputies never came back after that night, but word travels fast in a small town. By noon, everyone in Hollow Creek knew about what had happened, how the HOA had called the cops on an old man, and how it had backfired in spectacular fashion. The local Facebook groups lit up like fireworks. Someone posted, "HOA tried to kick old Mr. Turner off his land. Turns out he gave it to a charity for kids. Absolute legend." Within hours, it had hundreds of shares. By evening, a reporter from the Hollow Creek Gazette showed up at my door, a young woman named Sarah Lopez with a camera slung around her neck and a nervous smile. "Mr. Turner, do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" she said. I hesitated. "As long as you spell my name right." She laughed, then asked about the trust, the house, the kids. I told her the truth, plain and simple, that it wasn't about revenge or spite. It was about peace, about teaching one more lesson before I was gone. Sarah nodded, taking notes. "That's powerful," she said quietly. "Would you mind if I took a photo?" "Go ahead," I said, straightening up in my chair, "but get the flowers in there too." "Carol planted those." She smiled. "She must loved colors. She loved life," I said. "Every shade of it." The article ran 2 days later, and that's when everything changed. It wasn't just local news anymore, it read statewide. "Retired teacher outsmarts HOA, donates home to kids." Emails poured in from all over Texas. Strangers offering help, donations, even volunteers. Someone from the next town brought over a used riding mower for the foundation. The high school's shop teacher offered to help maintain the property for free. Before I knew it, we had an actual community forming again, the kind I remembered from before the HOA turned everything sour. People started coming by on weekends to help fix up the place. We replaced the fallen fence, cleared the debris, and even built a small shed for tools. Kids laughed again in the yard, their hands dirty, their eyes bright. And every time I saw them, I thought this is what it was all for. Of course, the HOA didn't take it so well. Marilyn and Rick filed another complaint, this time with the county zoning board, claiming the property was being used for unapproved educational purposes. But the county clerk, the same one who'd notarized my transfer, personally called me. "Mr. Turner," he said with a chuckle, "I read your story. Don't you worry, we're not touching a thing." Then a few weeks later, I got another letter, but this time it wasn't a threat. It was an apology. It came from one of the other board members, a man named Henry Dalton. He wrote, "George, I was part of the HOA vote against you. I didn't agree with what they were doing, but I stayed quiet, and that's on me. I want you to know that what you did inspired me. You reminded me why we moved here in the first place, for community, not control." At the bottom, he added, "If y'all have me, I'd like to volunteer at the foundation." I read that one, twice, maybe 3 times. Not because I couldn't believe it, but because I could. Deep down, I always knew people were better than their worst moments. Sometimes they just needed a chance to show it. That spring, we held the first official Turner Foundation workshop. The local paper came out again, took pictures of the kids learning to build birdhouses, plant seeds, fix engines. I stood back and watched, feeling a kind of quiet pride that no award or paycheck had ever given me. A few parents came up to thank me personally. One woman said, "You turned your pain into something beautiful." I didn't have much to say to that. I just smiled and said, "Pain's just another kind of soil. What grows from it, that's up to you." A couple of weeks later, I got a letter from the HOA again. This one was short, one line, typed neatly on their letterhead. "Effective immediately, the Hollow Creek HOA is disbanded." No apology, no explanation, just surrender. I sat there for a long time staring at that line, the words slowly sinking in. Then I looked up at the framed photo of Carol on the mantel. "Well," I said softly, "guess we won after all." But even with all that good news, my body was fading faster. The heart failure was catching up, and I could feel it every morning when I woke. Simple things, walking to the mailbox, watering the garden, became small battles. I didn't tell anyone how bad it had gotten, not even Eddie or Whitaker. I didn't want pity. It had my miracle, that was enough. Still, I knew I needed to make preparations. One night I sat down at my desk and started writing letters the old-fashioned way, pen and paper. One was for Eddie, one for Whitaker, and one for the kids. Each letter said the same thing in different ways: keep it going, keep it honest, keep it kind. When I was done, I sealed them and placed them in a wooden box on the mantel. Then I turned out the lights and sat by the window watching the stars. I remember whispering, "I did it, Carol, I really did." The next morning I woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains. My chest ached, but it wasn't painful, more like full, complete. I made my coffee, sat on the porch, and listened to the laughter of kids down the road. I didn't know it then, but that would be my last morning on Earth. When Eddie came by to check on me later that day, he found me sitting peacefully in my chair, the cup still half full beside me, and the smallest smile on my face. They buried me next to Carol under the oak tree that, when the storm had split, now standing tall again, propped by the community that grew around it. At my funeral, the kids from the foundation read the letters aloud, and when it was over, they didn't go home. They stayed, planting flowers, fixing fences, talking, laughing, just living, the way Carol would have wanted. A month later, the Gazette ran one last headline: HOA tried to take his house, but his final wish left a legacy instead. And beneath it, a photo of the foundation sign, hand-painted by the kids, the Turner home where every lesson grows roots. After George Turner passed, the air around Hollow Creek felt different. The town was quieter for a few days, not in the sad way, but in that reverent stillness that comes when people start realizing they've just lost someone who changed them. The old Turner place stood at the edge of the valley, the same wide porch, the same swing creaking in the morning wind. Only now, instead of one man sitting there with coffee, there were kids, students, volunteers, and neighbors. The Turner Foundation didn't slow down after his death. If anything, it grew stronger. Eddie became the caretaker and unofficial director. He wasn't much for speeches, but he worked like a man with a promise to keep. Every Saturday morning, his pickup was parked in the same spot George's old truck used to sit, and by noon you could hear the hum of saws, the laughter of kids, and the sound of nails being driven into fresh wood. The first few weeks after the funeral were strange. The HOA's old guard had scattered like dust in the wind. Marilyn Cox put her house up for sale and left town quietly. Rick was later caught up in a county audit. Turns out he'd been borrowing from HOA funds for years. The new homeowners committee, a small, informal group, sent Eddie a letter saying they wanted to restore trust and be part of what the Turner Foundation was doing. Eddie, in his typical blunt way, wrote back, "You can bring cookies to the next workday. That'll be a good start." They did. And for the first time in years, Hollow Creek started to look like the place it had always pretended to be, a small town that actually cared about its people. Everywhere you went, you could see little signs of George's influence. At the diner, there was a framed newspaper clipping of his story right by the register. The high school woodshop built birdhouses for the foundation's gardens every spring, and the kids who used to roll their eyes at community service started showing up on Saturdays asking for tools. There was even talk of naming the local library after him. But more than anything, it was the way people treated each other that changed. Neighbors who'd once argued over mailbox colors were now sharing tools, helping fix roofs, and planting flowers in each other's yards, wildflowers just like the ones George refused to remove. A year after his passing, the foundation hosted its first Turner Day. The whole town showed up: music, food trucks, local artisans. Kids sold handmade crafts, parents told stories, and the local paper ran a headline, "From HOA to Hope, How One Man's Final Wish Rebuilt a Town." That day, Eddie stood on the porch, microphone in hand. His voice cracked more than once, but every word landed. "I used to think George was stubborn," he said, looking out over the crowd. "But now I know he just believed too much in people to let rules get in the way. He didn't fight because he hated. He fought because he loved." The crowd was silent for a moment, then broke into applause. Up on the porch next to the Turner home sign, someone had placed a rocking chair, the same one George used to sit in. On the seat was his old notebook, weathered and stained, a few loose pages sticking out. One of the kids, a girl named Lily, picked it up and started reading. Inside were short, simple notes: "Teach them patience. Plant something every spring. If you can't win with force, win with kindness. Never forget that rules are meant to serve people, not the other way around." And on the last page, written in with shaky handwriting, were 5 words: "Make it better than before." Lily looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "He wrote this for us." Eddie nodded. "Yeah, kid, he did." That notebook became the foundation's creed. They even printed the last line on every t-shirt, every sign, every poster: "Make it better than before." The phrase spread far beyond Hollow Creek. Other towns reached out to learn how to start similar community trusts. Donations poured in from across the state: carpenters, teachers, even a retired lawyer from Dallas who offered to help other folks caught in HOA disputes. Within 2 years, there were 5 Turner Foundation branches across Texas, all following the same principle: turn hardship into hope. One day, Sarah Lopez, the reporter who'd first written George's story, returned to Hollow Creek for a follow-up piece. She found Eddie working on a garden bed, sleeves rolled up, dirt on his hands. "Still at it, eh?" She teased. He grinned. "Someone's got to keep the old man's promise." She walked around the property, snapping photos: the new classroom shed, the vegetable garden, the treehouse the kids had built in the oak that once split in half. At one point, she stopped and said, "You know, he didn't just save this place. He changed the whole idea of what home means." Eddie smiled faintly. "Yeah, he used to say home isn't about ownership. It's about belonging." Sarah nodded. "I think he'd be proud." Eddie looked out over the yard, the sunlight spilling across the grass. "He already is." That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Eddie walked up to the old oak tree. He sat down beneath it, just like George used to, and took out the small wooden box from his truck, the one that held the last letters. Inside, there was one envelope left unopened. It was addressed to him. He hesitated, then tore it open. Inside was a single piece of paper, written in George's unmistakable handwriting. "Eddie, if you are reading this, I guess I've moved on. Don't waste time missing me. There's still work to be done. You've got more heart than you know, and that place, our place, is in good hands with you. Promise me one thing: when the kids grow up, let them live. It's not supposed to stay mine or yours. It's supposed to keep becoming theirs. And if you ever feel lost, just sit under the oak. That tree knows everything worth knowing." Eddie folded the letter carefully, put it back in the box, and sat there until the sky went dark. When he finally stood up, he looked around at the flickering lights from the foundation's porch and whispered, "Don't worry, old man. We'll keep it growing." And they did. That summer, the foundation built a small wooden arch over the front gate. At the top, carved by hand, were George's initials, GT, surrounded by vines and flowers. Every visitor who walked through read the inscription below: "This home belongs to everyone who believes in second chances." No one in Hollow Creek talked about the HOA anymore. No one needed to. The land had been reclaimed not by law but by love. And in a town once divided by fences, you could now walk street to street and hear laughter, music, conversation. People waved again. They stopped by each other's porches. They baked pies, borrowed ladders, shared meals. It was in every way better than before. I never planned to become a symbol of anything. Truth be told, all I ever wanted was peace. A quiet morning, a strong cup of coffee, and the sound of wind moving through the trees, it was enough for me. But life has a strange way of turning small wishes into something bigger. Sometimes what we leave behind isn't just a house or a road or a patch of land, it's the echo of the choices we made. Even now, I can still hear that echo in Hollow Creek. If you stand by the old oak tree just before dawn, you'll hear it too, the creak of the swing, the call of the crows, the faint hum of the town waking up. That sound used to belong to me, now it belongs to everyone. The foundation carried on far beyond what I ever dreamed. Eddie told me once before I passed that he wanted to turn the back acres into a learning farm, a place where kids could see what honest work looked like, where they could learn to plant, to build, to fix not just things but each other. I told him that was exactly what the world needed more of, and from what I had been told since, that's exactly what he built. By the second year, they'd added a greenhouse, a woodworking shed, and a small amphitheater made from repurposed stone. On weekends, they hosted storytelling nights, music, and even outdoor movies. Families came from all across the county. Some just wanted to visit the man who stood up to the HOA. Others came because they needed hope. And somehow that old patch of land gave it to them. There was one woman who visited every spring, Mrs. Hawkins. She used to be on the HOA board back when all the trouble started. Back then, she'd voted against me every time. She even filed one of the noise complaints that nearly cost me my property. But after everything came out, after the truth about Rick and the illegal gate, and after the foundation started, she came by one day with a basket of homemade bread. "I guess I was wrong about you, George," she said softly. I just smiled. "You and half the town, Mom." She laughed, a little embarrassed. "I just want to help now, if y'all let me." And she did. She volunteered every Saturday for 3 years, working with the kids. She said it was her way of earning back a little grace. That's what this place became, a second chance, not just for land, but for people. After I passed, the community held a small memorial under the oak. Eddie told me later, or rather, I like to imagine he did, that the whole town showed up. No speeches, no ceremony, just people. He said they planted wildflowers along the fence line, the same kind I used to fight to keep. The funny thing about those flowers is that they're really stubborn. You can mow them down, pull them up, even burn them out, and they'll still come back the next season stronger than before. Guess that's the kind of thing that runs in the soil out here. In the years that followed, Hollow Creek changed. Not fast, not loud, just steady like the seasons. The HOA model that wants to find He married, had a daughter, and raised her on the very land we'd fought for. Her name was June, named after my late wife. That part still gets me even now. June grew up chasing chickens, painting signs, helping plant tomatoes. She learned how to fix fences before she was 12, how to make biscuits from scratch by 15, and how to lead a volunteer team before she could even drive. One day she asked Eddie, "Daddy, who is Mr. Turner, really?" He told her, "He was the man who taught us that home isn't where you live, it's what you build together." And that's how my story lived on, not as legend, not as gossip, but as a quiet truth people pass down. You'd hear it in small ways, a teacher quoting me when the kids got discouraged, a farmer reminding a neighbor that George Turner wouldn't quit that easy, a preacher telling folks to build better than before. Each time it spread a little further. Each time it mattered a little more. By the 10th anniversary of the foundation, the county held a ceremony to dedicate the land as a historical site. They installed a bronze plaque at the entrance that read, "The Turner Foundation, founded in memory of George Turner, 1949-2020, a man who believed land means nothing without love." People came from all over Texas for that event, mayors, veterans, families, and even kids who'd grown up hearing my story. Eddie gave the keynote speech. He didn't use notes, didn't read a script. He just spoke from his heart. George never wanted to be remembered as a hero. He just wanted to be heard. And maybe that's the real lesson, that when you speak truth with kindness, it outlives you. This land isn't his anymore, or mine, it's ours. And every time someone plants a seed here or lends a hand or forgives a neighbor, George is still here too. When he finished, the crowd was silent. Then slowly, one by one, they started to clap. Now if you ever drive through Hollow Creek on a summer afternoon, you'll see it, the Turner home shining in the distance, kids running through the garden, the old oak still standing tall. You'll see the wildflowers along the fence line swaying in the wind. And if you listen closely, you might just hear a faint voice, calm, steady, and proud, saying, "We did it right this time." There's a story the locals tell now about a stranger who stopped by Hollow Creek one winter evening. He'd been traveling cross-country after losing his home in a flood. No family, no plan, just a pickup full of memories. He saw a handmade sign by the road that read, "The Turner Foundation, hot soup, warm beds, no questions asked." He pulled in, more out of curiosity than hope. Eddie greeted him, as he did everyone, with that same slow nod and "You look like you could use a plate." The man stayed one night, then 3, then a week. He fixed a door hinge, helped clear snow, and sat with the kids at the fire pit telling stories of his travels. When he left, he handed Eddie a small coin, a silver dollar worn smooth. "Found this in my father's jacket when I lost him," the man said. "He always told me to give it to someone who reminded me of home." Eddie tried to refuse, but the man insisted. Now that coin sits under glass in the foundation's office right beside the old photo of me in June, smiling in front of our house before the fight ever began. It's funny how kindness ripples. You drop it once and it keeps moving long after you're gone. They say the foundation has inspired dozens of similar projects across the country, now small community trusts that help people stand up to unfair systems, rebuild homes, or create spaces where no one feels like they have to earn belonging. Some call it the Turner model, but I just think it's what we were meant to do all along. The truth is, you don't need to be a hero to change the world. You just need to care stubbornly, relentlessly, even when it feels like you're alone. A year before I passed, I wrote something in my journal. It wasn't meant for anyone, but I suppose it found its way into the foundation's archives. It said, if love had a map, it would look like this land, rough, uneven, sometimes broken, but full of places worth finding again. I think about that a lot now. I think about how much time I wasted being angry at the HOA, how much energy I poured into fighting, proving, defending. It took me years to realize the fight wasn't against them, it was for something deeper, for the idea that nobody gets to own peace or silence or beauty. Those things are meant to be shared. That was my real inheritance, and now it belongs to everyone. Sometimes at night, when the stars are clear, you can almost see the glow from the foundation's lights stretching across the fields. It's faint, a soft amber shimmer that touches everything in sight. From above, it probably looks like a heartbeat pulsing in the dark. That's how I think of Hollow Creek now, a living, breathing reminder that good things can outgrow the fences meant to contain them. There's one more story I'd like to tell, though I guess it's more of a memory now. It was the day before I died. Eddie was sitting beside me on the porch, same as always. We didn't talk much that afternoon. We didn't need to. The air was warm and the wind carried the scent of rain. You could hear the faint buzz of bees in the wildflowers and the sound of kids laughing somewhere down the road. At one point, Eddie said, "You did it, George. You really did." I smiled, slow and tired. Did what? He looked out at the hills. "You built something nobody could take away." And maybe that's when I realized he was right. They could steal deeds, build fences, call cops, and file lawsuits, but they could never take this. The belonging, the love. The soil stitched with memory. When the time came, I didn't feel fear, just gratitude. For the mornings, for the sound of hammer on wood, for the laughter of strangers who became family, for the chance to turn pain into something worth keeping. And when I closed my eyes, I swear I heard the porch creak, the coffee pour, and June's soft laugh floating on the wind. That's how I left, peaceful, and that's how I stay. Now the land tells its own stories. The oak drops acorns in the fall, and every few years one takes root. Eddie says they let the new ones grow wherever they sprout. George wouldn't have wanted us to cut them down, he always says. And he's right, because you can't stop growth, not when it's born from something real. One last thing I wrote in that journal at the very end was this: they tried to take my house, but it was never just a house. It was proof that love can outlast greed. And that no matter how hard they push, goodness finds a way back home. That's the lesson I leave behind. Not as a warning, not as a sermon, but as an invitation to every person who's ever been told they don't belong, to everyone who's been bullied by power or drowned by paperwork, to anyone who's ever looked at what's theirs and thought, not today, not like this. You are not alone, and your story doesn't have to end with loss, because somewhere out there's still land that remembers you. Still soil that knows your name. Still people who believe that doing right is worth every scar it takes. And maybe, just maybe, if you listen close enough, you'll hear it too. That whisper in the wind carried over wildflowers and fences saying, make it better than before.